Betty, it was your average late January evening in South Ashburnham, Massachusetts, a small town about 60 miles northwest of Boston. Betty Andreessen had just finished serving dinner to her 7 children and her parents, Wayno and Eva Aho. Her husband, James, is currently hospitalized after a serious car accident. Betty is standing at the sink washing dishes. The kids are watching TV, Bozo the Clown to be exact, and everything seemed pretty normal. That was until the lights went out, the television cut off, and silence filled the house. Betty went to find some candles so she could see to finish the dishes. And that's when she begins to notice an odd light flashing in the picture window. Pink at first, spilling over the house. Then it begins pulsating and shifting from pink to orange to red. Her father, Wayno, walks over to the pantry window and peeks out. And what he sees stops him cold. Several small figures moving toward the house, not walking as much as hopping, one behind another, with a taller one out front leading the way. And for a second, it almost looks like kids dressed up for Halloween. Then this merry group of out-of-place Halloweeners stops, and the lead figure turns, and it looks straight at Wayno. These are the last memories from that night. What happened next is a bit of a mystery. Most of the story doesn't get told for nearly a decade, not until hypnosis brings it all back. And when it does come back, it's a strange and complicated tale, including alien beings, a Bible, a glowing blue book, and a message Betty believed may have come from God himself.
Hey everyone, I'm Rob, and this is my brother, Pastor Rick. Welcome to the Parsonage Files.
All right, Rob, today we are looking at the Betty Andreessen case. Betty was a wife and a mother to 7 children.
Whoa. 7?
7 children by the age of 30.
Wow, she is one tired lady, I bet.
She is. Her life revolved around her big family and church. And at the time, she had no known interest in aliens or UFOs. Her biggest concern actually was her husband, James, who had been in a serious car accident about a month earlier. And James, being in the hospital, had put a real strain on the family, as you can imagine, both emotionally and financially. And that's why Betty's parents had come to help out until James was back on his feet.
To know Betty is to know her Christian faith. It played an important role in her life. It shaped how she understood God, suffering, angels, miracles, and sacred knowledge. It was through this same faith that she came to understand the strange events on that night of January 1967.
Rob, I think you're right in saying that we need to understand the role faith is going to play in how Betty looks at these events. See, faith gives us a framework for understanding experiences that we sometimes can't easily explain. And it can also help us sort out what's really going on.
But the big question we all going to want answered is what really happened during the missing portion of that night? And why did Betty understand it as a Christian experience?
So, Rob, in order to answer that question, I think the best thing for us to do is to take a look at what Betty remembered without any quote unquote help.
And that help would be
what it always is in these cases.
Hypnosis.
And you notice that I did some big air quotes around.
I saw that,
help.
Yes.
Of course, using hypnotic regression to recover lost memories is a very controversial
to say the least.
Yet to say the least. And we will be getting into that here in a little bit. But Betty did remember events occurring that night with no outside help. So this is what Betty remembered. She remembers doing the dishes, the lights going out, and seeing a reddish pink light pulsating outside. She also remembered how unnaturally quiet everything seemed, and she recalled her father, Reno, seeing strange beings outside and talking about the odd way they walked, how they were almost hopping like grasshoppers, if you will. And Becky, Betty's daughter, remembered seeing a strange being, if you will,
Okay.
with her mom. But as for Betty, after hearing her dad talk about seeing these strange creatures outside, literally the next thing she remembered was waking up in bed with only a vague sense that something odd had happened.
Well, and the day after the incident, Betty had no complete memory of what had happened. Key details that would become later fixtures of this story were never mentioned. Things like being taken on board a craft, a medical examination, a blue book, a duplicate Bible, an alien world, a giant phoenix, a spiritual message. None of this. Not that night, not the next morning, not for years after did any of those points come out.
Yeah, in fact, the household returned to ordinary life. This was a busy time for the whole Andreessen family. Now, Betty felt troubled and confused about what had happened, but she didn't let that stop her from doing what needed to be done. After all, who else was going to look after 7 kids and a husband in the hospital? She did carry something from that night, though, a sense that the whole evening had felt fragmented, dreamlike. And in the weeks that followed, she had flashes and impressions connected to that night and dreams that she just couldn't quite shake.
So, Pastor Rick, just to summarize, what we're saying is that nobody in that house, and there are like, 10, 11 people in this house at this time,
Yep.
actually remembered Betty being carried into a spacecraft. And not even Betty. No one remembered this.
Yeah. But the family did remember something weird happening that evening. Again, those flashing lights and those strange little beings hopping around.
The alien conga dancers in the backyard?
Yeah, I mean, that's something, right? So Betty spent years looking for someone who might help her recover the missing pieces of that night. And she found that person in 1975 when Betty answered a call for UFO reports from a research group tied to astronomer J. Allen Hynek, the same Hynek who had been a key part of Project Blue Book, the Air Force's own official UFO investigation, and the man who had coined the term Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So Betty's story reached Hynek, but to be fair, at first it wasn't much different from all the other reports crossing his desk, and it took some time, but eventually Hynek sent the case to the Massachusetts State Director for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, a gentleman by the name of Raymond Fowler.
And Fowler was an experienced UFO investigator who also had a technical and military background. His experience and careful investigation techniques give this story credibility.
Now, during Fowler's investigation, both Betty and her daughter Becky were encouraged to undergo hypnotic regression, hoping to recover their memories of that night. And the hypnosis was conducted by Harold Edelstein at the New England Institute of Hypnosis.
Is that a real place?
It is. And I know it sounds like someplace like a Batman villain would be running,
But it's real.
but it is real. Fowler's team obviously didn't invent the whole hypnosis approach to researching UFOs. They had actually modeled it directly on the most famous abduction UFO case that came before this one.
Would that be the Betty and Barney Hill abduction?
It was the famous Betty and Barney Hill abduction of 1961, which was, of course, chronicled in John Fuller's book, The Interrupted Journey. And Fowler used the same idea. Recover the missing time using hypnosis. And interesting, both of these cases, you think about it, are from New England. And
How far apart are...
I believe like close, like about within like 90 minutes, less than 90 minutes.
Okay, so they are close.
They are relatively close. And besides the hypnosis, Fowler and his team reviewed Betty's character and her mental condition. Polygraph examinations were reportedly given, and a total of 14 hypnosis and debriefing sessions occurred throughout the year of 1977. All told, it was a 12-month investigation, and it produced a whopping 528-page report.
That is a lot of document.
Long before you could have AI write it for you.
Right. You actually had to,
sit down and type it. So across those sessions in 1977, this is what came out.
First, Betty described the lights suddenly coming back on. To her amazement, 4 beings appeared in her house, having allegedly passed directly through a closed wooden door. They communicated with her without moving their mouths. Betty experienced their voices inside her mind.
Would that be telepathy?
That would be telepathy, Pastor Rick. And she knew ordinary physical beings couldn't just walk through solid wood. So her mind reached for the one story she knew of where something like that had happened, when Jesus appeared to the disciples through locked doors. In her own words, from the hypnosis transcript, Jesus was able to walk through the doors and walls. Then came Hebrews 13:2, the Bible line about how strangers you welcome into your home might secretly be angels. Betty wondered if that's exactly what these creatures were. It didn't erase the fear, but it gave her something to hold on to.
So Betty reported that the creatures were roughly 3 feet tall, but the leader stood closer to 4 feet. They all had pear-shaped heads, gray or clay-like skin, enormous dark eyes, tiny nose and ear openings, slit-like mouths, 3-digit hands, dark blue uniforms, and little boots. And the uniforms, they had bird emblems.
That's adorable.
And this is my favorite part. The leader identified himself as Quazga.
That rolls off the tongue.
Quazga. Quazgaa.
Wait. Pastor Rick.
Yeah.
Let's just stop there for a second. So they were wearing clothes, like actual uniforms.
Uniforms, including boots.
Okay, I mean, it kind of makes it sound more real. In every alien movie I've ever seen, the aliens usually do not have clothes. So
that's true. Yeah, they're usually depicted as walking around naked.
Yeah, or at least like astronauts without pants.
Well, see, that doesn't make any sense because we don't send our astronauts up into space without pants on.
Right.
Why would you fly all the way across, let's say, the galaxy with no clothes on?
Right. I mean,
and what are the chances that in the entire galaxy, we are the only beings that discovered clothes
or pants? I mean,
or just pants.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, that just seems odd.
It does.
But we're going to see that that's not the only odd thing in this story.
All right, moving on, Pastor Rick.
Moving on. So the creatures were motioning to Betty. And so Betty thought they were asking for food. So she went to the kitchen and started cooking meat. The beings stopped her. That wasn't what they were trying to get at.
They're like, whoa. So the roll on the grill.
Yeah, whoa, this isn't what we're trying to do here. What they wanted, they said, was knowledge. Something tried by fire. Betty took that to mean something spiritual. So she brought out the family Bible and handed it to Quazga. In exchange, Quazga gave her something back. A thin blue book, its pages glowing, covered in symbols that she didn't recognize. Then the leader appeared to make copies of her Bible right there on the spot. I guess copyright apparently isn't a thing where they come from.
Right.
And the other beings all crowded around studying the glowing pages of scripture like they had never seen anything like it.
So we'd be having a little Bible study going on in her kitchen.
Basically.
Okay. Now, Betty wasn't the only member of the family to undergo hypnosis, right? Didn't her daughter Becky have hypnosis too?
Yeah. So the claim is that she had come out of the trance that the aliens had put the rest of the family in.
On that first night.
And she had a brief memory of seeing these creatures with her mom.
What she said they look like?
Well, she couldn't recall. She just had a memory of seeing like a silhouette, if you will, with her mom. But under hypnosis, she said that she became aware that she was standing in the living room and began to look around, and she noticed the rest of her family were paralyzed. And she glanced over and saw her mom talking to what she called a clay man with these smaller figures standing behind him. Betty and this leader had their hands on the same book between them, the blue one, and it glowed. From what Becky could see, her mom and this alien were conversing. Then the bigger alien who was talking to her mom noticed that Becky was no longer in the trance and was watching them, and he looked straight at her. And that's the last thing Becky remembered before the darkness came back.
Pastor Rick, I like that story, and Becky's account is kind of compelling, but isn't the vast majority of that recovered under hypnosis? Not completely independent memories, right?
Yeah. And while the Bible's a nice touch, remember what the Bible really meant to Betty in particular. God's revelation, a source of truth that she already trusted. The Blue Book represented a new revelation offered by unidentified beings. So this whole event was very steeped in religious meaning. So the beings told Betty that they weren't there to hurt her, that they had come to help, and they needed her help too. Betty wasn't ready to go along with that.
Imagine that.
I can imagine that. And she asked them straight out, were they of God?
And what did they say?
Well, they didn't give her a clear answer. They kind of hem-hauled around a little bit. And then she thought of her kids and her parents who were frozen in place in the house. And she asked the aliens, or whatever these are, would they be safe if she left? And the beings told her yes. And, that actually goes along with some other alien abduction stories that talk about how one person would be abducted from a group of others, and that everyone in the group would be in this like hypnotic trance,
right.
And one of the aliens would stay behind to watch them.
Make sure everything was okay.
Now, to be clear, Betty didn't say that's what happened. She was just told they'll be fine, and she skedoodled off with these creatures.
Don't I remember reading that she prayed at this point for guidance on what to do?
Yes. And she believed that she had been told by God to trust them and to go along. So she joins this tall leader and the other
conga line aliens. Do they dance out of the house?
I don't really want to use the term conga line for them. I see them more as like background dancers.
Fair.
Yeah. So she said they began walking towards the door, but she said it was more like a gliding. And soon she and the beings moved together through the door and out into the backyard, where this thick mist had settled in. And along the slope behind the house sat something oval-shaped and metallic. And as she got closer, an opening appeared in its side. All right, Rob. So what happens when she gets closer to this oval-shaped craft?
As the door opens, out comes this light. The beings called it a cleansing thing. Nothing more really happened there. She apparently went through some type of UV sterilization like I do when I'm introducing fish into my tank and I put them in a quarantine for a bit. Gotta make sure they don't have any ick or any, anything like that.
They wanted to make sure this gross human didn't bring any diseases onto their ship.
Right. Gotta put a little ick-X on her, make sure, run through a UV sterilizer, make sure everything's okay before you put her in, contaminate the tank.
So what happens after she got the
scrub?
Yeah, got the light scrub.
So once they've given her the deep clean, they led her elsewhere in the ship. She said it was like a small, dark room shaped almost like a wedge, maybe the inside of a pyramid. A white garment was hanging there waiting for her, like they had it laying out ahead of time. She heard in her head the question, "Would you please change into this?" Betty didn't want to, but eventually she gives in, and she does.
All right, I got to stop you there. That sounds like those Saturday Night Live skits where... Colleen Rafferty.
Yes.
The character where she's always getting abducted by aliens, and then they're doing stuff like, hey, would you put this on for us? And then they're all standing there staring and, doing really body kind of things.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly what we're having described here.
Here, put this on. Why? Scientific reasons.
Scientific reasons. All right. So once she had gotten dressed, she was brought to a new room. She said this one was brightly lit, dome-shaped, and it had a long table on it. That's when the examination begins.
That's not good.
No. An instrument went into her left nostril. She had a lot of pain. She recalls feeling something breaking or being pulled free from her nose. And another instrument went into her navel. The beings were talking about light and procreation and things like that. And that's when Betty made a connection in her mind. She had had a hysterectomy. Maybe that is why they had abducted her.
Then something descended from above her. It was large, shaped like an eye, and it moved toward her stomach. And Betty became, quote, severely distressed.
Yeah, imagine, right?
But Kwaska, the chief alien, saw that this was upsetting Betty, and said, stop. That's okay. We won't do this test.
So what happened after Kowalska stopped the test?
So she ends up getting off that long table and being moved to a transparent human-shaped chair, which isn't creepy at all.
Wait. So they had a chair already shaped like a human?
Yeah, so think about that. Either they were expecting her or...
This wasn't the first rodeo with humans.
Gotcha. So Betty said that a clear enclosure then sealed around her and the chair, and she became instantly cold. And then tubes entered her nose and her mouth, and a gray liquid began to rise around her. And she feared she had drowned. So basically, she was inside an injection molding.
Right?
And she began to panic, but she discovered that she could breathe through these tubes.
Wait, isn't this sort of like what's his face that had the alien abduction story in the 70s? Fire in the Sky guy.
Travis Walton.
Travis Walton. Didn't he have a big eye and liquid he had to breathe through and all that jazz?
Well, it was at least in the movie. I'm not sure if that's in his book or not, but yes, very, very much so.
All right, what else happened?
And she said this sweet liquid began to enter the tube that's in her mouth. And then the chair began to vibrate.
Like a washing machine?
Yeah, and it began to form a whirlpool. And she said that it was, quote, strangely soothing. Kind of like a jacuzzi.
I was thinking, sort of like those rooms they have on cruise ships. You pay extra to go in for the spa. Yeah.
Those like immersion tanks.
Yeah.
So as the liquid drained away, two beings now wore dark coverings over their heads and led her into a tunnel that appeared carved through stone.
That is not weird at all, Pastor Rick.
And by this point, Betty said she wasn't on the ship anymore. She had left it through a long black tunnel, not walking, just doing that gliding thing again, skimming a few inches above this narrow track, barely as wide as a book. And from there, everything kind of blurs together. You get like these mirror-like barriers and red and green landscapes, very trippy kind of stuff.
Right.
She begins to see distant cities, all kinds of strange creatures and crystalline chambers. And Betty said she could no longer really tell whether she was above ground, underground, on another world, or just inside a vision.
What happened after that?
Well, so Betty arrives before this light.
So another giant light?
And she describes it as this brilliant, crystalline, impossible to look away from kind of light. And standing in front of this light was an enormous bird.
Shut up.
And it had a pale head, brown feathers, and a white light burning behind it.
Is this the bird that was on the uniforms of the people that abducted her?
Well, it could be. Well, actually, that's a really good question. I don't know. She doesn't really go into that too much. She said that there was something like golden dust filling the air around this giant bird. Then the heat came, and Betty said it felt like her whole body was being destroyed. But the bird, it didn't fly away. It just disappeared into fire, burning down to a single glowing coal. The coal then turned gray, and out of what was left, something began moving, and a small worm-like creature emerged from the ashes. And a voice spoke to her, and it told her that she had been chosen.
Really?
So Betty looks at this light and asks, "Are you God?" So Rob, knowing how these aliens operate, when she asked this light, "Are you God?" what do you think it answered?
Didn't really answer it, I bet. Him holding around.
You are 100% correct. The voice didn't give a direct answer. So Betty answered for herself. She said what she believed, that she had faith in God and in his one and only son, Jesus Christ.
And is this where she gets the message from God?
Well, from something.
Okay.
And so she receives this, for lack of a better term, telepathic message. And the message wasn't long, but it, boy, covered a lot of ground.
What did they discuss?
So it said, this entity said that humanity was moving towards its own destruction, not from some outside force, but through its own bad choices.
Isn't that what the aliens always say, Pastor?
That's what everybody says. And it told her that people needed to go back to studying nature, paying real attention to the natural world around them instead of just ignoring it and destroying it. And it told Betty that physical knowledge, knowing about things that you can measure or hold in your hands, wasn't the most important thing. That spiritual knowledge was what really mattered. And that wasn't all, Rob.
Oh, okay.
This voice in her head said that it had more secrets to divulge to her at a later time.
That's not sketchy at all.
When the timing was right. They always say that.
Yeah, they do.
They always say that. Well, we've got more, but we're going to have to wait until a different time. Really?
Why don't we just do it now while I'm here?
If it's that important, why don't you tell me and I'll write it down?
Why is it that way?
I have literally no idea. So next thing Betty realizes is Kwaska is with her and she is back at her house. And she realizes that her family is still there, still frozen in place, and they are exactly where she left them. And she was told that she wouldn't remember any of this, not for a very long time.
At least the statute of limitations runs out.
And then the family was released from their trance, and Betty was taken upstairs. And the next morning, she woke up with almost no memory of what happened, just a few fragments and a vague feeling that something weird had happened. All right, Rob. So as Christians, we can take a look at stories like this and apply some of the same rules that we would use to apply to anything else that we want to look through a Christian lens at.
Okay.
So let's look at the story itself. And what you'll notice is that there is not one single conscious memory of Betty ever actually seeing aliens, meeting aliens, going anywhere.
Right.
All of that is from hypnosis. Kwaska, the blue book, the exam table, the phoenix, if that's what you want to call that bird.
Right.
All of it came from the hypnosis sessions conducted 10 years later.
Which are questionable at the best.
Yeah. None of that comes from anyone's memory on January 25th, 1967. So really, all we know for sure is that Betty and her family lived in the home that they say they did, that James really was hospitalized, and Betty's parents and children were present in the house when she claimed all of this occurred.
And Wayno, he remembered reporting seeing small figures outside, right?
He did. And the family remembers unusual electrical and some sort of luminous disturbance. So the story isn't totally without basis.
Right.
But
there's a lot of stuff added in that hypnosis sessions.
Well, and, experience, I think, tells us that something affected Betty, but it doesn't tell us what it was that affected her.
Right. I mean, and 10 years is a long time to remember details of any event. And hypnosis isn't really the greatest method for arriving at truth. So how much of Betty's story are actual events and how much is, well, I don't want to say it this way, but I'm going to fantasy.
And if you look at what actually made this case famous, that the beings walking through a solid door, the blue book, the phoenix rising out of its own ashes, these three examples, the list could go a lot longer, actually. And not one of them was in anybody's memory. Okay, Rob, so what's really missing from this case?
Well, we don't actually have any physical proof, right? We don't have a spacecraft. We don't have any marks of a landing. We don't have a photo of any of these dudes that kidnapped her. They didn't leave any of their medical instruments. There is not even an implant. Don't even get me started on alien implants. That blue book she discussed wasn't found. Nothing. All Betty can confirm is that she believes she had a journey. And there's no way to prove that any of this is true. And to make it even weirder, they did all these medical tests and didn't bill her insurance once. What are the odds?
Which is the oddest single thing is that somebody did medical tests and nobody got billed for them.
Right. That makes no sense.
Where in the universe does that happen?
Right. Nowhere.
Yeah. All right, Rob, let's talk about hypnosis now.
Do we have to?
And And here's the thing about how memory actually works. Your brain, in a lot of ways, works like a computer. And it's not just playing back a recording when you remember something. Every time you access a memory, your brain makes a new copy of it. That's just how it works. And that's exactly why memories can change over time. Because if you pull it up enough times, especially with someone gently prompting you along the way, each version gets a little more detailed. Things are added. And when it gets saved again, it gets saved with those additions. And over time, memories can change.
Isn't that what happened with that satanic panic back in the 80s?
Absolutely. It happens all the time. And so that's why hypnotic regression today is not looked at in the same light it was in the 1970s, because there's just a much deeper understanding of how the human brain works and how human memory really does operate. And the problem is that hypnosis can increase certainty without increasing accuracy. So what can happen is after somebody has undergone hypnotic regression, a memory that they were once not so certain if it was real or not,
Solidifies it in their mind.
it solidifies it in their mind. And, this isn't just a theory about UFO cases or this case in particular. It's exactly why most U.S. courts stopped accepting hypnotically recovered testimony starting in the 1980s, around the same years the recovered memory scandals of the satanic panic era were falling apart under scrutiny. It's exactly that same sort of mechanism. And Betty's emotion may demonstrate sincerity.
Yeah, I don't think she was making it up.
No, but it does not establish that every single scene occurred outside of her own mind. And one more data point, and it's a strange one. Betty was a genuinely talented amateur artist, and she drew dozens of detailed sketches of everything she described: the beings, the craft, the exam room. Her earliest drawings from 1977 show the beings with normal-looking eyes, whites, pupils, the whole works. Her later drawings from the 1980s show solid black eyes, no whites at all. And
more like Close Encounters of the Third Kind aliens?
Yes. And now this doesn't prove anything on its own, but it is exactly the kind of detail that should make you want a little more evidence before you start believing everything Betty's telling.
Right. Why did it change?
And Rob, there's also a few other questions that I think we should ask.
Are these the same questions we always have with alien abductions? Like, why can they travel across the universe, but they need needles?
Exactly. Why do these visitors need needles and scanners? If, as you said, they have technology to walk through walls,
right,
or to fly across the galaxy. Why would you need what would be basically primitive technology,
right,
medical technology?
But to be fair, other people have reported the exact same thing, not just her.
True. So I have no idea.
Yeah, maybe that really is how they roll.
But maybe that is. Another question worth asking is, how come the memories she had right after the event are super vague, but then after the hypnosis, her memories, even the memories that she had consciously after the event, are now crystal clear?
Yeah, why would that happen?
Yeah. And it's just the overall weirdness of the story. Things that don't quite line up and make sense. I've noticed something, maybe you have too, Rob, over the years, is that when a story stops making sense, that's when the questions need to start being asked, right? True stories, even fragmented ones, tend to make logical sense.
Right. And like a story that's like all over the place is seldom true.
Very seldom is a story that's just all over the place true.
And can we go back for a second, Pastor Rick?
Yeah, okay.
Can we go back and swing back to the blue book for a minute?
Yeah.
Betty said that it was like a real physical object, right? She held it right there in her hands. So where is it? I mean, there's no book now, right?
Correct.
There's no photos, no page, no, nothing.
Correct.
If it was solid enough to hold, why didn't she take it with her?
I think these contradictions don't necessarily prove that Betty lied, let's say, but they might suggest instead that our final story probably didn't happen exactly the way she later described it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Pastor Rick, but
Yeah.
wasn't there some type of life turmoil for her about the time she went through hypnosis?
Yes.
Wasn't her marriage dissolving to James?
So by the time hypnosis began, Betty's marriage to James had ended. And she later married a man named Bob Luca, who became part of the story's later complications.
Oh, that's where he came from.
Yeah. So James and Betty got divorced. There's no real record as to the reason why, but the assumption is that as Betty got more and more into trying to investigate this quote unquote missing time in her life, that it put strain on an already tense situation. And James,
I don't know, 7 kids, how stressful could their marriage be?
How stressful could that be? And things were just getting kind of weird. So now Betty has married Bob Luca, and
that's where he came from.
Yeah, that's where he came from. And things continued to get stranger and stranger as the case began to explode in the public consciousness after the release of Fowler's book. Fowler himself began to allege that he was an abductee. And Bob Luca also began to report experiencing unusual experiences. And additional spiritual and paranormal claims began to accumulate around this couple.
Can we say Amityville, anybody?
And the case has more sequels now than a horror franchise.
It really does. I mean, it's a lot like the Amityville horror story where everyone just starts tagging on and having an experience and writing books.
I want to say Fowler wrote, what did he write? 3-4 books on this subject?
It was a lot.
It was a lot. Now,
and then he writes himself into it.
Correct. And as they always say on these type of stories, there's always a book.
There's always a book.
And in 2007, Bob Luca's son, Bob Luca Jr., publicly accused both his dad and Betty of maintaining a hoax. Now, obviously, he wasn't there. Yeah, he wasn't present in the Andreessen home in 1967. So his accusation most directly damages the expanding later Luca era claims, if you will.
Expanded abduction universe, if you will.
But it doesn't independently disprove the original household disturbance. But it is true, though, the further this story got from January of 1967,
the weaker it kind of got.
The weaker it gets.
So, Rick, the important question is, what do you think happened?
Well, I believe the family probably experienced something unusual way back in 1867. And Betty was probably sincere in her beliefs about what occurred. But that doesn't... I don't think that makes the story 100% true.
I would agree with you. It was something happened in 1967, but it has spread into a story that has lots of, let's say, twists and turns that may or may not have actually occurred.
And so if the way I look at it, so if the facts don't fully hold up on their own, why did Betty say that she experienced all of this as a fundamentally Christian encounter?
I mean, she thought she was visited by angels, right?
Well, she wasn't sure what they were, but yeah, if that was God who was talking about Jesus that she met, then these creatures would be
angels. And she remembered what Scripture, offered them the Bible, asked whether they came from God, prayed before allowing them to examine her, affirmed faith in Jesus, all of this.
Well, yeah, Christianity really shaped the way Betty understood the situation, which is not unusual. Our religious faith very often shapes how we view certain situations.
So in her context, what you're saying is because she was religious, she viewed it in a religious.
Yeah.
Where a scientist or an atheist, let's say,
would probably view it very, very differently.
Gotcha. Yeah. And and thinking about that, something else I've noticed listening to all this, isn't this just a version of the hero's journey?
Yeah, kinda, isn't it?
Roll with me here, Pastor Rick.
Yeah.
And it's been a while since I've read Joseph Campbell, so I could be completely misinterpreting the hero's journey. But so basically, she gets called out of her ordinary life.
Yeah.
She crosses over into somewhere strange through
Yeah.
a door, and then there's an ordeal, the examination, then something like death, and then a rebirth right there with the phoenix, burning down to nothing and coming back again. She's kind of handed a secret knowledge in that blue book thing, and then she's sent home, left to figure out what just happened.
Absolutely. It definitely has a lot of what you would call the mechanics of modern science fiction.
It really does.
Also, there is, from the Christian viewpoint, a theological problem with all of this and thinking that these creatures are angels and this voice is God.
Is it the dancing?
It's not the dancing. The beings use very Christian sounding language, but they don't clearly identify themselves. In fact, they avoid Betty's direct questions completely. Instead, they offer private knowledge and tell her that she is specially chosen. Christian language alone, though, doesn't establish Christian truth. In other words, just because it sounds Christian doesn't make it Christian. Plus, why would angels, spiritual messengers from God, need to run medical exams on humans?
It sort of reminds me of that famous line in Star Trek V when Captain Kirk says, "Why does God need a starship?"
Exactly. Why would angels need to run a medical test?
Right.
That makes no sense. They're spiritual beings working for God. They would already know your blood pressure. So I think Betty's faith may explain why she trusted the being so willingly, but I think our Christian faith also gives us reasons not to trust every being that appears to be supernatural, right? The Bible tells us that we are to test the spirits. And, there's actually a framework for this in our own tradition. Us Methodists call it the Wesleyan quadrilateral. And it's scripture, tradition, reason, and experience. So go with me on this. I promise I'm not going to turn it into a sermon. But the first thing we need to do is to use scripture as the main test, as the thing everything else gets measured against. So 1 John puts it pretty plainly. Do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits. And Jesus said it just as plainly. By the fruit, you will recognize them. So think about this for a second. Did these aliens produce love, truth, humility? Or are they producing things like fear, obsession, a sense that you need secret knowledge that nobody else has? Tradition means listening to what Christians have already worked out about things like this over the centuries. And tradition is pretty consistent on one point. Be careful with private revelations. And the next step we should use is human reason, which means actually applying logic to it, questioning the hypnosis, the contradictions in the story, the missing evidence, the oddness of it all.
And isn't that basically the whole back half of this episode, Pastor Rick? We've just spent 20 minutes doing reason.
Kind of. And experience, which is the fourth leg of this quadrilateral, means taking what Betty went through seriously. Something did happen to her. She had an experience. That part shouldn't get dismissed, even while everything else is getting tested. So if I put these four together, here's where it lands for me. Betty's experience deserves to be heard with compassion. But reason, it raises some questions for us.
Right.
Our tradition urges caution, and scripture is the final test. And it says we need to be very careful about what we think is some sort of private revelation coming from some spiritual being. And think back to the exchange in the kitchen, the Bible for the blue book. The Bible was the revelation that Betty already had. she already trusted. And it's a revelation that has been tested over centuries by literally millions of people before her. This little blue book was something else entirely. It was new, it was private, unverified, just Betty and whatever she says was written on those glowing pages.
Right.
And here's the thing, though. Scripture itself started as private revelation, right? Moses at the burning bush, John on Patmos. So it's not the private experience that automatically makes it worthless. What makes it questionable is that it hasn't been vetted over literal centuries by millions of people. This is just some book that Betty says some creature that came walking through her,
written by some rando from Massachusetts
door. This is a revelation that has been handed to Betty from some creature that walked through her door on a random evening. That's kind of odd.
You think?
And even in Christianity, there are books such as, let's say, the Gnostic texts, which were claiming to be writings about Jesus that were totally not accepted by the church because they could not be vetted correctly. They were seen as a private revelation.
So one last topic I'd like to swing back around to is Wayno.
Yeah.
So he saw everything with his own eyes. He reports seeing what he thought were Halloween characters, right? Or people dressed up like Halloween costumes, doing a conga line in the backyard. What are you supposed to make about that? Something clearly was going on outside, right?
Yeah, I would say something happened outside that house. But, the full story, I don't think we're ever going to find out what really happened. I mean, 10 years is a long gap in time. And that's how long it was before anybody started researching what the family saw. And hypnosis is just, fortunately, too unreliable a tool for recovering facts. It's just too easy to build new stories with it.
And there's zero physical evidence, right?
And there's zero physical evidence for any of the specific details. Again, no spacecraft, no blue book, no implants, no marks in the grass where a ship might have landed, or burn marks where a ship's exhaust might have burnt some vegetation. So outside of that, we can't really establish that extraterrestrials entered the home, or whatever these creatures were entered the home. We can't establish that Betty physically traveled aboard a spacecraft, or that she had an encounter with a phoenix-like animal, or whatever that was. And we certainly can't prove that any of this, outside of really just the lights going out and some strange lights outside, we can't prove that any of this occurred outside of Betty's own mind. And we also can't identify the beings she claimed to have encountered as angels, or treat their message as some divine revelation. If anything, this experience totally goes against what the Bible depicts as the normal ways that God gives divine revelation.
But she truly believes something happened, right? Even up to her death, which was recent, right?
Yeah, Betty died peacefully on March 18th of 2022. And right up to the end, she remained convinced that what she experienced was real. But here's what her family remembers about her. Not somebody who had some weird experience. They remember somebody who was a mother, somebody who was strong, somebody who held on to her faith through more than any of us would want to carry. Whatever happened that night, Betty Andreessen was more than a claim to be proved or disproved. She was a mother who endured extraordinary losses and continued to find meaning in her life. So, Rob, something else that I think is important to mention is that in 1977, when Betty was undergoing the regressions, two of her sons died. In October of 1977, James Andreessen Jr., age 21, and Todd Andreessen, age 17, were killed together in an automobile accident near Westminster, Massachusetts. and Fowler places the crash approximately 24 hours after he interviewed Betty on October 21, apparently shortly before midnight on October 22nd, 1977. And the timing became part of the paranormal and religious interpretation of the case. On October 19th, Betty and Bob Luca reportedly heard an angry, unintelligible voice interrupt their telephone conversation. Betty believed she received impressions such as "it is done" and that something was being prepared. And later that night, Betty and Becky reported strange lights inside their house. After Betty discussed these incidents with Fowler on October 21st, James and Todd died in the crash about a day later. Betty interpreted the voice as a fallen or evil angel and had come to believe that it had somehow caused or foretold her son's deaths. Fowler, however, wrote that investigators found a logical reason for the accident, although he withheld the details as confidential. There was therefore no demonstrated evidence that the accident was caused by anything paranormal. That was Betty's personal theological interpretation of an appalling coincidence. But that does tell you a little bit about
Gives her mindset.
Her mindset that anything odd, anything upsetting, anything out of the ordinary automatically received an interpretation that it's God, that it's angels.
I honestly think something happened that day in 1967. Her dad saw something happening. It was something weird. Power went out, what have you. None of the rest of it, I am 100% sure actually occurred. But I do believe something weird happened. I don't think that she was abducted by aliens, though. What do you think?
I think something odd happened. I think something odd happened. I don't know that I would be able to go with she was abducted by aliens that took her to see God or some intelligence, if you will. It just seems that she took an odd story that had some places to fill in,
Right.
and it just allowed her mind to fill those spaces in with the religious imagery that she found comforting. Because I think that the not knowing was very worrisome to her.
Right.
And it helps, even if it's something scary, to know what something is rather than not know. Right. And so this helped her, even though she was scared of it, it gave her something to fill those gaps in. So, again, I've had people tell me stories that I know for a fact weren't true, but they weren't lying to me. They were just
They believed they were true.
They believed they were true. And they had either misinterpreted something, or, I've never had anybody come to me that's had hypnosis. I mean, I had a guy come to me once who believed that a local restaurant was, in fact, operated by organized crime and was running illegal gambling. And
that probably was true, right?
Yeah. And he wanted me to go with him to do an undercover sting operation.
Oh, shut up.
No, I swear to you. And I go, yeah, no, thanks. It was, not Roots, the other little family restaurant that was down in Lancaster. And it was the guy that was dating.
This is probably not something you should be sharing out loud, Pastor Rick.
Yeah, probably not. But he was dating. Oh gosh, don't get old. Anyway, one of my church members, and yeah, I was like, yeah, you know what? Why don't you go spot that out for me? And then, the problem is this restaurant was like literally, we'd just been there not too long before that. And this restaurant was literally had 10 tables in it. There's no way. Plus the fact it's Lancaster, Ohio. That's not happening. So,
right.
Ready?
Yeah.
So Betty deserves, I think, compassion, not ridicule. Her interpretation deserves, I think, real examination, not automatic acceptance, of course, but not automatic dismissal either. And I think faith gives us a pretty good framework for understanding experiences that we cannot easily explain. But it also gives us something else, the humility to admit when we simply don't know. So which evidence matters more to you? What the family consciously remembered back in 1967? Or what Betty and Becky described under hypnosis 10 years later? Mystery, though, I don't think requires gullibility. And skepticism does not require cruelty. Think about that.
I shall.
You stepped on my moment.
I thought you were done.
I know, Sadie. I look disappointed at him, too. We'll see you next time
on the Parsonage Files.